Hello again. Thank you for coming. Before we begin today's episode, I just want to take another opportunity to remind everyone that joins me within this space that this is indeed a space of love and of no judgment, and that those of you who come, I expect you to come exactly as you are, no other expectations, no matter where you're from, what walks of life you've taken, who you are, what you've done, what religion, it doesn't matter. Come exactly as you are. And another reminder that this space is a space of introspection, of profound thinking, and I don't want anyone to think or believe that this is in any way therapy. While this is very therapeutic to talk about and to have the space to speak on these things, I am in no way a therapist or a professional. And if anyone comes into this space with any sort of mental health condition, that is very important to us and to me. And so I advise you to find the nearest, the closest help that you can, be it an emergency department or be it an actual professional. Please just I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there. I care about everyone, and I want everyone to come into this space with with my arms wide open and with an open heart and an open mind. So thank you again for joining me, and let's get this next episode started. Hello, and once again, thank you for accepting my invitation to this next episode number 2. As I mentioned before in some previews and promos, the idea of this newest episode was to get into the exploration of the different kinds of masks that we wear and explain a little bit what that means exactly, what it means to wear a mask, what kind of masks, certain examples, my own experiences, with the hope that we can go a little deeper now that we've peeked into the mirror. Last episode was all about looking into the mirror and recognizing that there are some things under there that may need addressing, that we've kind of put behind us or have been too afraid to look at. And I'm really excited to start this episode because it is going to get pretty deep. So welcome to episode number 2, an invitation to remove the mask. So what exactly do I mean by wear a mask? What does that mean when someone wears a mask throughout their life? I'll give you the easiest example. I remember, growing up, I wasn't the most popular kid in school. I was growing up in a household where I didn't have an opportunity to express a lot of the excitement or emotions that I had because there just wasn't the space for it. I didn't know how to read the room, I guess, when I was young, or know when to say something, when not to say something. And I was a very hyperactive kid. I'm gonna be very honest with you. Even now, like I get so excited. If you give me an opportunity, I'm gonna go nuts. But I was a really excited kid, and um, you know, I didn't know what was considered cool and what was considered not cool. And growing up in grade school and high school, it's tough, man. You're trying to make an identity for yourself. You're in one of those Erickson stages, and you're trying to create an identity. And I didn't know. So I would just I would put on this mask. Having gotten a lot of negative feedback from my hyperactivity. I was so hyper, man. Um, it wasn't. It was really frowned upon. I got beat up a lot as a kid. I got picked on. I was small, whatever. Um, but as I got into high school, that kind of all changed, and I don't remember when exactly or how, but I do remember things changing. And it wasn't until I was much older. I was working um, in the hospital at this point, and I remember um, catching myself one day. It was such a interesting kind of phenomenon. I was like, why? Where did this burst of energy just come from? And it was when I was meeting new people. Every time I met someone new, it didn't matter if I was tired or not, because I was tired. I was studying, I was working full time, and I was tired. But I would meet someone new, and I would get this sudden burst of energy, and I'm like, showing my best self, being as ecstatic as I always am. And I never understood where that came from until much later down the line when I did some thinking on it, and I realized that's a mask. It's like the people pleaser, right? It's like in a way that's one of the masks we're going to talk about is the people pleaser masks. It's one of those masks that we wear when we fear rejection. So we put on the show, we put on our best self, and it's very interesting because then I remember I would be all excited, I would make promises or whatever, and then I'd go home and just be so tired, and be like, why did I say all that? Why did I invite myself to that thing? How many? I know there's a lot of us. We tend to define it as introverts, right? It's like I made all these plans and now I'm at home. Like, why did I do that? I don't want to go anywhere. But maybe that's just a mask that we wore, right? We put on a mask to make it seem like we were so interested in these things or these events, and we make these plans, and then suddenly you're like, I don't want to go. So, anyways, that's one of the masks and an example of how we wear these masks in life, right? My need to feel important in that person's life, in that new experience with this new human being. I wanted to show them my best self because I was afraid that they would not like the ugly side of me, right? The part of me that's always tired, because when I go home, I didn't know how to regulate my emotions, right? So I would always go home, I'm too tired, I don't want to go out, I don't want to do anything, I'm lazy, not good. Because again, as we spoke about in last episode, those feelings are a result of suppressed emotions, and we can get into that a little further, but that's essentially the idea. We walk around, we wear this mask depending on where we're at, what we're doing, who we're meeting, who we're around. We each have a mask that we wear, and it's what gets us through life, through our daily living, right? So why do we wear them? As I just mentioned, it's more so to just our ability to survive, right? Because we didn't have the space or someone to talk about or the guidance to express or kind of resolve those emotions or infancy wounds that were created through our childhood traumas. And so we create these masks. My form of coping was going to my room and playing games whenever my parents would fight or there were arguments or there was, it was a chaotic household. The only thing I knew how to do was run in my room and hide, and so I'd turn on the games loud enough that I couldn't hear anything, right? And those are wounds. That's fear. That's anxiety, and that those get suppressed. So how did I cope? I was the best video game player in the world. At least I was in my head. I was terrible, but to me, I was great. But essentially, that's what ends up happening. We create these masks. So what kind of masks are there? I'll give you a few examples. I have here the strong one. Oh boy, the strong one. Everybody has a friend or knows someone who wears the strong mask. It's the mask that we wear to hide our vulnerability. It's the one dude you probably see walking around who swears he's like the toughest man in the world. And I'll be honest, man, I've come to understand it. And I know this is probably not good, but I'll hype him up. I'm like, yeah, man, this guy, right? This guy's the best. But I do it because I understand that the mask they're wearing is hiding a vulnerability. And so I tend to do that for them because it builds a sense of trust with them in the way that they understand. It's like, all right, this guy sees my worth. In his mind, his worth is wearing that strong mask, like the tough guy. Yeah, no one's going to mess with me. But what I'm doing is I'm only giving him space to, validate what he's feeling at the moment. Even though I know that that's clearly a sign of a vulnerability, I hype him up to the moon. I'm like, yeah, bro, you strong, bro. You look great. And the truth is, I'm not lying. I don't think I am, because they are usually pretty strong and pretty big guys. But essentially, the idea is the strong person is hiding vulnerability within, right? Maybe they were called very weak when they were children. Maybe they were picked on because of their size. And so they created this mask that they can put on when it finally came time to address that fear. They're like, F that, man. I'm going to put this mask on and I'm going to show them, and they wear this mask for the rest of their life, not knowing that they've created an identity around this. And it's not really them, but that's how they survived. That's how they got through life, man. And so the reason why I bring up this one particularly is because we see that a lot in today's society amongst our men. Um, I have these episodes in Spanish as well, and in Spanish it's called machismo. We call it machismo in Spanish. It's like this tough guy syndrome, and in our families, me being a Spanish man, in my culture, it's very it happens quite often where the fathers who aren't emotionally intelligent because they didn't have that opportunity to be, or no one taught them the importance of being emotionally intelligent and that regulation, well, they grow up believing that you got to be tough to survive, and that weakness, that showing emotion is a sign of weakness. And while that's a controversial topic, the truth is emotional regulation is a requirement for every human being on this planet, because everyone has it. It doesn't matter if you're a man, it doesn't matter if you're a woman, or however you identify, everyone has emotions. And not being able to regulate it will cause so many problems down the line if you're not careful. So the strong man, that's the strong mask, okay? Then we have the people pleaser, which I already spoke about briefly about myself. I would put on this mask to and show off my best qualities. I would give my best performance. The people pleaser, the one that does the yes man. Hey, you need it, you got it. And it's funny because these masks are not only just an identity we created, they're parts of ourselves. It's just maybe taken too far, because I do love hyping people up. I love making people feel like the center of the universe. That is my superpower. But without proper balance, I was using it to the point where I was exhausting myself, where I was going overboard and maybe putting too much of myself out there. And that causes stress and depression and anxiety, and only builds upon the things where we're trying to hide with the mask, which is quite the conundrum if you think about it. And then we have then we have the perfect version of ourselves. This is the one that avoids flaws. This is the one that is afraid to see the flaws within. Uh, I'm not now. Everything I'm saying is just ideas and theories I've created based on what my understanding of psychology, philosophy, the human behavior, and what I've learned over my own time in the career in which I work in observing other people and serving them. So what I'm saying is not an exact science. It's just an opinion and theories and ideas that I've created with that, um, off of these observations. But there has to be some truth to it, only because I've seen it time and time again. So bear with me again. This is just perspective. This is not a truth nor a lie, simply an opinion of my own personal perspective that I wish to share, with the hopes that you can elaborate and tell me what you think and we can grow together. But anyways, just putting that out there. The perfect version of ourselves. Now, there's nothing wrong with dressing nicely and looking your absolute best. But maybe there's a reason why you have to look so perfect every time you go out. For me, it was my hair. Don't laugh at me because I'm wearing a hat right now. But like in high school, man, growing up in high school, when I was in high school, I lived in Chicago at the time. And everybody who lives in Chicago knows it's the Windy City for a reason, because during the winter time, it gets cold outside, man. And I only lived 10 minutes from the school. So I would walk there. It wasn't a problem for me. But you would find me doing my hair, spending 20, 30 minutes, because it had to look pristine, even though I look back on it sometimes, I'm like, what was I what was I thinking? But I would spend all this time in 30 below. My ears would be freezing. I'd get to school, my ears were about ready to fall off. They were red and numb. It was terrible. Why did I do that? Right? But in my mind, it had to look perfect. Why though? This is one of my favorite things to talk about, because I learned from a coaching class I did with someone very special that down the line I hope to talk about him more. But he was a life coach and a psychologist. He taught me about, his name was Rodrigo Garcia Platas, if anybody's wondering. But he taught me about inner self-confidence and outer self-confidence and where they come from. Right? So inner self-confidence comes from your mother. It's always from the parents, right? Our childhood. Inner self-confidence comes from the mother. So if you have a mom, for example, for the boys, who you grow up with her, and you're like, and she's like, man, you're the best baby boy in the world. Like, no one can tell you or tell me otherwise, that you're the best son that ever existed. Nah, she hypes you up to the moon, right? Those are usually the guys who have so much inner self-confidence that they don't care how they look. They dress crazy in public. They just don't care. They really don't. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But they're usually the ones that could go out looking absolutely nuts, and it's fine because in their mind and in their heart, mama said, I'm the best. All right? Mama said, I'm the best looking, I'm the best whatever. No one can tell me different. So they have a lot of inner self confidence, okay? Um, and then you have outer self confidence. And where does outer self confidence come from? Well, that comes from dad. And how does that work? Well, let's say you're playing a baseball game, right? And pop, you're getting ready to hit. You're at bat. You're gonna hit. You're in your mind. You're like, I'm gonna rock this ball because pop is watching. You hit it. Boom, that ball goes flying outside of the park, and you look to your right before you make your run because you see your pop yelling and screaming, "That's my son, right? That's my kid!" And you're so proud. You're like, "Yeah, it's my pop, hyping me up out there." That is outer self confidence. That's how we build that. And so those kinds of people can go out into public, into society, and they can stand in a crowd of 500,000 people and not be even the slightest bit nervous because they're confident in their abilities and their skills because pop was there. And just so that it's known, these things can also come from people that aren't our parents. It can be someone that was a mother figure to you in your life, or someone that was a father figure, or an older brother that played the father role. There's depth to this, but essentially, father for outer self confidence, mother for inner self confidence. Okay. And I was someone who had a lot of outer self confidence because being a musician, my pop would always hype me up. He would always tell me how great my music sounded. He would go nuts because he was a musician himself. But because my mom, unfortunately at the time, had her own struggles, right? Her own emotional wounds, she couldn't be the mother figure. She was also playing the role of father figure in my life. She was making sure I was protected and fed and all the things that pops would usually do. But I lacked that motherly love in the way that helps me build that inner self-confidence. So I always looked, or I was the pretty boy. I was the one that had to look my best. My clothes were always ironed. My shoes were always clean. My hair was always done. Even if it took me an hour, it didn't matter because I was confident inside. So I wore the mask of the perfect person. All right. So that's one of my favorite examples to talk about to give you an idea of how this stuff works and how deep it is, because it gets pretty deep, man. We're going down a rabbit hole right now. And another cool mask that I wanted to talk about is the detached one, and just simply explain it. It's the one that avoids connection. And this is a big one. Why does the detached one avoid connection? Why do we wear this mask? Have you ever noticed, like, you'll meet someone who's like, yeah, I don't like people. I'm a total introvert. But they're the nicest freaking people on the planet? And they're just absolutely amazing individuals, like, and you're like, bro, why don't you speak more? Or dude, or girly, what, why don't you talk? You're so great and so kind and so gentle. But to them, they're just complete introverts. They hate people. Is that true? Probably not. They may be wearing that detached mask. And why is that? Why do they avoid connection? I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory, especially since I like to think that the world in recent times has waken up to these wonderful truths of you know the difficulties we're facing in the world of mental health and psychology. There's a lot going on, and there's a huge lack of connection. And so, why do you think they're so detached, even though they're so kind? Usually it has to do with being hurt, right? Because no one, it doesn't matter who you are, or what you've experienced or what your opinions may be. No one wants to feel the pain of rejection, man. Nobody wants to. Nobody wants to be hurt. No one wants to be left out. No one wants to be the last pick at dodgeball. You know what's crazy? I was the last pick. I was the last pick, man. I get it. Detached. Thankfully, I've always had it in my heart to connect with people. So I never, well, actually, no, I think I have worn that mask, and it happens even now in my relationship today in a different way. But essentially, the detached mask is someone that avoids connection because most likely they've been hurt by someone close to them. and they were never taught how to regulate that emotion or that pain of rejection and how to move past it. So they stay stuck. They stay stuck. And it's very unfortunate, but that's one of those masks. Um, so how are they created, and or why do we create them? Uh, you know, as I mentioned with the last mask, it all come. I can't say everything stems from childhood, but a good majority of things that we experience, our emotions, all stem from childhood. It's just how it is. And a lot of this stuff, a lot of these masks are created, as I mentioned before, because they're survival mechanisms, okay? Because some of us, or most of us, or maybe those that are here now, those of you watching, perhaps didn't have a father or mother who can teach you, as I mentioned before, emotional regulation. And that emotional regulation is so important for survival. I mean, look at everybody today. I mean, I'm not judging anyone, but there's a lot of occurrences these days that we are now seeing because cameras are so abundant, where people tend to immediately judge them and say, man, that dude's crazy. No, there's just a lack of emotional regulation there. They don't know how to handle their emotions. And so it's like children stuck in adult bodies, right? And you can kind of think of Erickson stages. If you're not familiar with Erickson stages, Erickson in psychology has created these stages from certain ages, from I think it's 0 to 9, 10 to 18 years old, 19 to 30, and each stage is where some form of emotional development and neurodevelopment is undergoes a process. And if you're following those stages appropriately, then you become a pretty well centered adult. But sometimes we tend to get stuck in those stages, and so you can be in the stage that's from the ages of 10 to 18. You can be stuck there emotionally, neurologically, and you have a fully grown body, but that your mind is still that of a teenager, and that's just an example. And that's kind of what happens with these masks, is that we put on these masks and it becomes so normal for us wearing them that we don't even realize it until someone holds the mirror up to you. Someone puts the mirror up to you, and then you're like, well, here we are. Sorry, had a little bug fly at me. Someone holds the mirror up, and then that's when you get defensive because you're not ready to accept that that's last episode's conversation. But as you see, this is how it all comes together. So how do they hold us back? There's so many ways that this stuff can hold us back. I mentioned with the first mask, using my example, how it led to exhaustion, right? Because I love to hype people up, but sometimes, there's a great saying that I'm sure we're all familiar with, that you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't. You really cannot. And if you try, you can keep going, and you're just going to be so drained that your nervous system, which is the what is responsible for the emotions and the triggers and the responses that you feel, the nervous system itself shuts down because the body's like, I can't do this anymore, man. You're doing too much and I can't keep up. I got to shut down. Wham. Now you're stuck in the house. You become a total nomad. You don't want to leave. Now you're a real introvert. You're stuck. You're a couch potato. And that's one of the ways they hold us back, is through anxiety, exhaustion, right? Because maybe you have endeavors and things you want to try. I mean, take this podcast, for example. I have been wanting to start this for so long, you don't understand. But my own struggles in my own personal life kept holding me back, and it took a while to get to the point where I was officially ready to do this. But there were steps and patience, and oh my god! But here we are, nevertheless. Some other ways, it's relationships, and this is a big one. Depending on the masks you wear and the unresolved traumas, and this is something I commonly hear, having gone through it myself, having seen it with my own eyes, is people say, why do I keep attracting the same men? Men, why do I keep attracting the same girl? Maybe we're looking for certain patterns. Maybe we're drawn to certain traumatic patterns that those people have. And we'll talk about that down the line. But sometimes when we wear these masks and we refuse to, or maybe aren't ready to see behind that mask and acknowledge what's under there, right? Looking into that mirror, we lose the opportunity to move past those wounds, those triggers that are creating that emotion. And we can't become better for our partners, first for ourselves, because the first person who you should become better for in this life is yourself. Because in showing yourself love and respect, you are better able to give love and respect to others. Yes? But if you can't do that for yourself, then how can you do it for your partner? How can you get better unless you look behind that mask and make that decision to work on those wounds, right? So you're constantly going to have trouble in your relationships, and that's one of the ways it can hold us back as well. And how do we remove it? It's quite simple. There was a great story that I also learned from Rodrigo. I can't really remember verbatim what it was, but essentially there was this person who lived in this town and he wore all these different masks. And I think what happened was one day someone broke into his house and stole his masks while he was asleep. And the next day he woke up and found out and freaked out, right? And he ran out of his house to the town square where he was asking everyone, "What happened to my mask? What happened to my masks?" And basically he ended up dropping to his knees and finally felt the warmth of the sun on his face. And in that instant was just so grateful that the masks were gone because he could once again feel the sun. It was such a beautiful story. And sometimes it's as simple as that, just removing it. And it's hard because when you're stuck in the same pattern that you've been in for quite some time, it's not easy to remove it. It's not easy to say, I'm just going to take this mask off and be a whole new person. It doesn't work like that. It takes time and effort and the realization that you've been following this program that's been in your brain and you have to undo it. And you've been doing this for years and years and years. It's a habit at this point. It's you don't just stop. And that's why I mentioned in the last episode to find grace with yourself in those moments, to be patient, right? To give yourself grace and be thankful for every step you make, because every step essentially is going to get you closer to breaking that mask, you know, and eventually removing it entirely, and allowing those wonderful parts of yourself that have been suppressed to shine through as they were always meant to. Awareness, simply being aware and recognizing when you're acting, recognizing when you put the mask on. So like me, I recognize that when I would meet someone new, I'd immediately put this mask on, right? I would wear the mask of the best worker or the best whatever in the world. And I caught myself because I knew I was tired. So I was recognizing when I was acting, when I put the mask on. And I recognized that, oh, this is an occurrence that happens when X, Y, and Z comes into play. Discomfort, in terms of removing it, learning to sit with the fear of being seen, learning to recognize that when I take off this mask, people are going to see me for exactly who I am. People are going to understand this version of me. And I think we get nervous about that because, as I said before, like you grow up with this lack of inner self-confidence. So you're not sure that people are going to receive you exactly as you are, or are not going to love those parts of you that you think are ugly. But the truth is, those parts of you that are suppressed are the best parts of you that just never understood how to progress, how to, emotionally regulate themselves. So showing that, though, you know, being that we are all energy, we are all beings of energy, being able to show those parts of ourselves release such a positive wave of amazing light and vibration that others can sense and feel. And so basically when you allow those parts of yourself to show, it's authentic, and that resonates with everyone. Anyone can feel that. It's a wonderful feeling, and people know when you're being authentic. So learning to sit with the fear of being seen, learning to kind of step out of that role and let yourself be seen. I think we all have like one or two people in our life that we can be around and be our absolute selves. For me, it's my buddies that I grew up with in Chicago, and they know when I get on the Xbox, I'm an entirely different person. I yell like a maniac. I yell like an absolute maniac. But it's because I'm not afraid of them seeing me in that way, and with them I can be my best self, and we all have someone. So extend that reach a little more with others, be more confident, give someone the opportunity to allow that space for you, and encourage. It's simply a courageous act of showing up as ourselves even when it's hard, taking off the mask, or instead of putting on the mask of caregiver or people pleaser, just saying, you know what, maybe today I can't do that. Have the courage to say, I can't do that for you today. I don't have the ability to be present for you in the way you need me to be, right? Because in doing that as well, you're giving yourself permission to heal, because you're finally standing up for that little part of yourself, that inner child that hasn't had the chance to do it, that didn't have it growing up. You're doing it for him now, or her now, right? You're stepping up to the plate and you're saying, you know what? I can't do this. I'm not in the space. And that honesty carries so much weight, right? Because you're being more authentic. You're telling the person, okay, you're setting these clear boundaries, and they're going to understand, man. They're totally going to understand. And that's a beautiful thing. Moving on. I just want to kind of leave you with something before we go. Maybe a few questions. How does life change when we remove our mask? How do people react? What do you think happens? And this is important because I think every single person who's here, or most of you guys, have heard that when you take this path of self-awareness, things tend to fall apart. Things tend to start falling apart. You may lose friends. People may not understand. People may question, like, you're not that kind of person, right? What are you doing? It's a tough journey in the journey of self-awareness, right? Because you're removing yourself from a certain program that you followed for so long that maybe other people are also following. And you don't want to do that anymore. So separating yourself from that crowd comes with removing that mask, because you're not going to want to feel the need to do it. You're like, why am I doing that? I don't want to do that anymore. And those people may not understand. Do not be discouraged. Understand that they're also on their own journey. Meet them where they're at. Say, hey, man, look, I know that I've done this for so long, but there are some things I want to address within. And it's okay to be honest. That's removing that mask. That's the courageous part, is recognizing that it's going to get hard. It can even be family. And this is huge, because a lot of people are afraid to grow out of fear that their family is not going to understand. And that's not good. That's a hard step to take. And I want to emphasize that. That's a very, very hard step to take. But at some point, you have to give yourself permission to form your own identity. It's not their responsibility. It's yours. You are responsible for that. No one can help you do that. Only you. And sometimes, I'm not saying forget your entire family, move on. No, not at all. But recognize that you have to have the courage to say, I need to do this for myself. And they may or may not understand that. And that's okay. It's up to you. Very, very important. Okay? And we'll get into that a little deeper down the line, but just want to kind of break the ice on these subjects. So before I leave, I want to thank you once again for joining me on this episode. I really hope these topics spark questions within you and give you insight and help you create your own questions, because if you do, I would really love to answer them. I have space. I have the TikTok at root.analysis if you want to come in and leave a question. That's the whole point of the TikTok, is Q&As post episodes, so I can answer your questions. We can go a little deeper into this and create this wonderful community where it's safe to speak. It's no judgment zone, man. Come on in, let's talk. We love to hear you. And for those of you who are Spanish speakers, a reminder that I do have the episodes now in Spanish for you guys. And every episode will have a Spanish episode that will be posted later in the week. I try to make these weekly. We're also on Spotify. If you just prefer audio, you can go on Spotify and just listen. It's always a good time. But yeah, come through the TikTok, leave some questions, leave some comments, because then you give me things that I can talk about and get a little deeper into. Before I go, I'll leave you with one more question. Now that you are aware, what is a mask you are used to wearing? It's a good question. An opportunity to look and identify your own, and maybe we can talk about it. Thank you again for joining. I'll see you in the next one.